Happy Friday. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Friday. Unemployment further eased in January.
The government's economic cluster opposes calls for a national minimum wage, saying it will just worsen inequality.
Is a 4-day work week good for employees? An employer group says this could just cause mental fatigue to workers.
And the Bangko Sentral says it sees no need to follow the U.S. Fed's decision to raise rates, but analysts warn that not moving in pace with the Fed could result in a weaker peso. We begin our broadcast with the country's jobless rate further dropping to 6.4% in January. That's from 6.6% in December.
Now, this translates to 2.93 million jobless Filipinos. That's lower by 1 million from the 3.96 million unemployed Filipinos in January 2021 and more than 580,000 in October last year. Newly released data from the PSA showed the country's overall employment situation also rose to 93.6% from 91.2% in the same period last year.
The Employers Confederation of the Philippines President Sergio Ortiz Luis believes the government is going the wrong way in considering a 4-day work week. Now, speaking on the big story, Ortiz Luis says the government should focus on fixing mass transportation issues first if the intention is to save up on fuel. He also believes that extending work hours in a 4-day work week could cause mental fatigue among workers, which is why it is better to retain the current 8-hour per day work week, which is 5 days a week. Now, Ortiz Luis also argues that implementing a 4-day work week will not boost workers' productivity, but he says he's still open to considering this proposal as a stopgap intervention.
On a temporary and not compulsory, we can look at it. Then the companies can do what they can to adjust.
Now, the Finance Department and NEDA are thumbing down calls for a national minimum wage, saying it will just worsen inequality. Though the DOF has yet to release its official position on the proposal, Legislative Liaison Specialist Gian Ginto already made an initial objection, saying the measure may cause high inflation on top of the ongoing fuel crisis. Ginto also said the cost of living varies per region. NEDA, on the other hand, said it supports raising wages but opposes a uniform national minimum wage, which it said will drive away businesses. Now, from shortened work weeks, wage subsidies to wage hikes, the Labor Department has got their work out for them as government scrambles for measures to provide relief amid soaring fuel prices. To discuss all that, we have on the phone Labor Undersecretary Benjo Benavides. Yusek Benavides, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you, Jeff and Ms. Danny. Good morning. Thank you for having us in your program.
All right, Yusek, again, you heard that you have NEDA pushing for a 4-day work week. What's the Labor Department's position on this? Are you also going to support that call?
Well, we understand the call from NEDA. But before I respond to that, let me just provide context as to the proposal for employers in the private sector to implement 4-day work week. Actually, this proposal is not new. A 4-day work week is just one of the alternative work arrangements that the department encourages employers to implement. But the implementation and adoption of which is a matter left to the management and the employees. So if to the employers and to the employees that would benefit them, then it's the decision that they should come up and report to the department for monitoring purposes.
Yusek, do I understand correctly? You mean the Labor Department cannot mandate a shortened work week? If that is the case, I do believe that the palace has said that they are going to make a decision on the matter come Monday, meaning the proposal is still on the table and it's something that they are considering. Should the palace decide that, yes, we're going to say, okay, we're going to greenlight a possible shorter work week, is the Labor Department going to contest that?
Well, no, of course. But then again, let me provide the legal framework regarding the implementation of a 4-day work week. It remains to be a management prerogative. The labor code does not set the minimum number of work days in a week. Instead, it imposes a maximum number of days in a work week. So whether to adopt or not a particular alternative work arrangement, such as the 4-day work week, is again up to the private sector.
Okay, Yusek, shifting over to the unemployment figures for the month of January, which came out this morning from the PSA, 6.4%. But this, of course, as we've already seen, NCR at least, and a lot of neighboring areas here easing to the lowest level of restrictions. This follows also December, which was also, a month wherein there were eased restrictions. But of course, in between that, there was this Omicron issue. Sir, is this enough to say that we are on the path to recovery? Why did we not have more employment, or why is this unemployment figure still above the average pre-pandemic?
These are signs of recovery. We still need to get the pre-pandemic level of employment as well as unemployment rate. But I think given the latest results from the PSA on the January 2022 labor force survey, this is a promising result. This simply means that we need to do more to further open the economy and therefore allow businesses to resume in full capacity so that workers who lost their jobs for the last 2 years already go back to their respective companies and enterprises.
Okay, Yusek Benavides, I do recall last week you have Secretary Bello ordering a review of the minimum wage. Do we have updates on that? Is that still on the table, especially now that the DOLE this time is pushing for a different alternative here? You are calling for a wage subsidy of 500 pesos for 3 months, but only for 1 million minimum wage earners. Why stop at 1 million to begin with?
Well, with respect to the 1 million target, that is the number that we will first prioritize. But given the budget, we can increase that. But going back to the directive of the Secretary, that directive to the Regional Tripartite Wages and Productivity Board still stands. Actually, regional directors who are chairpersons of the board have already met, and they are already in the process of studying and assessing the petition filed in the respective board. I think there are now petitions in 6 regions, and these are now being processed by the respective board. Sir Jess and Ms. Danny, based on the rules of procedure, the board should call a hearing and public consultation on this matter. So it will take some time before the board can make a decision.
Okay, sir, before we let you go, on the issue of rising oil prices and transport proponents saying that they need higher, transport costs here, and some calling for wage hikes. But then we did have Joey Concepcion on the show as well yesterday contesting this, saying that the SMEs are going to have a hard time with these wage hikes. Sir, will this be affecting the unemployment print should a wage hike be implemented if the MSMEs cannot afford this?
We don't think so, because we continue to open up the economy. And in any case, the matter of wage increase is better left to the board, who are in the best position to determine and assess whether there is really a need for the increase. By the way, the board is the composition of the board has its own labor and employers representatives.
All right. Thank you very much again for your time this morning. That was Labor Undersecretary Benjo Benavides. Thank you very much, sir. The government's budget deficit widened to 23.4 billion pesos in January as spending increased due to the release of tax allotments to LGUs. The January fiscal gap jumped by 66.3% from the 14 billion peso deficit a year earlier. That's with expenditures growing by close to 10%, outpacing the 6.6% increase in revenues during the month. Month on month, the fiscal gap sharply narrowed from the record 338 billion pesos in December.
The Bangko Sentral says it does not have to follow the U.S. Fed's rate hike. BSP Governor Ben Diokno says the central bank calibrates monetary policy in response to external developments only if they influence the country's growth outlook and inflation. However, former BSP official Diwa Ginigundo and analysts warned that this could mean further peso depreciation. Recall that last Wednesday, the Fed increased interest rates by a quarter percentage point for the first time since 2018. This as it responded to a 4-decade high inflation print over in the United States. But can the economy beat the high inflation if we do not move in step with the Fed? Here to weigh in, we have with us Chief Economist of RCBC, Mike Ricafort. Good morning, Sir Mike.
Hi, good morning, Danny and Jess.
Sir Mike, very quick reaction of yours to the comments of our good Governor Ben Diokno on saying that we do not need to keep in step, that our next meeting is on March 24, after, of course, the highly expected, let's say, rate hike of the U.S. Fed. But, sir, now the situation is dramatically changed. Of course, we're in a recovery situation, but we are also faced with the highest we've seen in terms of oil prices, which might exacerbate and have second-round inflation effects. How long can we stay this accommodative?
Well, there are really the important considerations, Danny. First, would the second-round inflation effects be a risk either in the near future or particularly in the coming months? So maybe not yet because there are still petitions for increase in wages and issues for transport fare hikes, both of which could be sources of second-round inflation effects or the higher prices of other goods and services in the economy. So far, we're not yet seeing that because, well, at least there's a consolation. Global oil prices already sharply eased from a high of 130 barrels last March 7 for the NYMEX oil. Now it's down to around $103 to $104. For 3 straight days until yesterday, it was hovering between $95 to $96. And to think that a day prior to the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, it was doing at 92. So oil has dramatically gone down from the elevated levels last week. So, of course, the situation is still fluid in the sense that any decisions on transport fare hikes and on wages would partly hinge on that, the trend in global oil and commodity prices. So that's one. So maybe this time, well, if you were to simulate, if the BSP say would tighten now and try to follow the Fed, would that address the problems on inflation? Maybe not. It's a question of, well, would it be effective? Maybe not also because the increase in inflation right now, largely due to supply side factors, exogenous factors that are beyond the country's control, and we haven't really seen yet the second round inflation effect. So, and to think that we're still reeling from the pandemic, the recovery is still fragile. So the economy doesn't need, well, the risk of a premature tightening of monetary policy that could potentially jeopardize the recovery prospect. It's really a delicate balancing act. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes.
Talking about economic prospects here for the Philippines, of course, one huge factor of that would be, of course, a labor market. What's our outlook here on the country's labor force? We did report, of course, on unemployment figures cooling for the month of January yet again. But this comes at a time wherein there are a lot of measures being put forward here. We're talking about wage subsidies, a shortened work week. So how are you putting all of these pieces together, and how does that for you affect the outlook of the labor market?
Well, true, Jess. The latest labor data that came out at 6.4% unemployment rate, that's the lowest or the best level since the pandemic started. So it's even, well, despite the fact that last January we had some restrictions due to the lingering Omicron variant. But nonetheless, look at how the data as well still managed to improve because since November, we already shifted to granular lockdowns or smaller scale lockdowns. And well, that's still the bigger picture. We're still further reopening the economy towards greater normalcy. And looks like the next step would be the proposed nationwide alert level 1. And even considerations for, well, alert level 0, although the protocols for which have yet to be established. But nonetheless, it's bottom line is really the further reopening of the economy as suggested by the economic managers, and that may include face-to-face or in-person schooling, the resumption of which would largely hinge on the successful inoculation of children of school age, as well as other measures to further reopen the economy, like the subsidies, the increased subsidies for the transport and agricultural sector, as part of the non-monetary measures, which would be more effective, at the very least, in curbing poverty in those hard-hit sectors because of this the rise in fuel prices, and also at the same time, it would also mitigate the pass-on effects of higher fuel prices to the general public. So,
sir, just to interrupt you po on that point, because you mentioned the higher inflation rate. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez said yesterday or Wednesday that they're planning to cut the taxes on the food imports to curb those price pressures. But at the same time, they've said they will not be cutting the excise taxes on fuel because we need that to fund the pandemic response. Is this, going to circumvent that inflation print? And also related to that, sir, we do have some offshore analysts saying that the worst is over when it comes to commodity prices. They've bottomed out. You did mention that oil is already going back to 100 or hopefully below 100 a barrel. Can you say with confidence that the inflation scare might be over already, at least in the coming weeks?
Well, Danny, if you are to be circumspect about it and prudent about it, realistically, well, there may still be some uptakes because right now with crude oil at $104 for the NYMEX, well, it ranges from 103 to 104. Yesterday, it was doing around $95 to $96. It's still sharply lower by $26 to $27 from the peak of 113. So that's still at least a sigh of relief, a source of comfort that at least we have seen the worst already, hopefully, despite mixed signals on the diplomacy talks between Russia and Ukraine. And well, but we have to also recognize the fact that crude oil prices, well, the NYMEX ended 2021 at 75. So there may still be some residual upticks going forward. But hopefully, we'll see the big price hikes on local fuel pump prices this week. Hopefully, some of which would be reversed, maybe most of which would be reversed in view of the latest downward correction, because that only happened, the sharp downward correction only happened this week, and also since late last week. What would really, well, on the fiscal, well, it's really a delicate balancing act also on the country's fiscal performance. Well, because right now the debt to GDP ratio is already at 60% levels. That's already within the international threshold. Well, it's really important not to really go beyond that if it's possible, and the need to narrow the budget deficit at the same time. So, well, the retention of excise tax collections on petroleum products would be seen as something that's fiscally prudent in this delicate balancing act. And the subsidies, and then other non-monetary measures, for instance, the reduction of tariffs temporarily on food imports, that has been part of the non-monetary measures that would have a more effective approach in mitigating inflationary pressures on the supply side. So that's on top of other measures to also help increase supply of food and other basic commodities in the local market in an effort to bring down prices rather than, well, of course, an outright tightening of monetary policy would not be necessarily effective.
Thank you so much, sir, for those insights. As you mentioned, hopefully we have seen the worst already, but of course, there are a lot of policy decisions still to be made. Thank you so much, Mike Ricafort, Chief Economist of RCBC.
Now we'll have more stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.